Okay, so this is the fifth video lecture in the chapter on culture. And we left off in the previous one, and I was talking about dominant culture and subcultures and countercultures and those concepts. And then we flipped over here to a screen that talks about values and values in U.S. society. So there's probably in your textbook, there is in some of the textbooks, so basically a section that lists all of the what we call American values and emerging American values. And sometimes when my classes are in person, I would pass out a behavior and I would ask you to identify like what behavior, what value, what's the idea behind that behavior. Remember, the key thing here is to understand the relationship between our ideas, our values, what we believe to be true, what we believe to be good, and how we act. So theoretically, what you have on this list is you have all of these ideas, these beliefs that supposedly, or one could imagine, everything that we do is lined up with one of these values. Even the most outrageous thing like murder or criminal behavior, theoretically, it should line up with one of these values. And it can kind of be a fun discussion. It can kind of be a fun exercise to try to figure that out. I mean, if you're that kind of nerd. But certainly some of these, sociologists argue, and some textbooks talk about how they hang together, how some of these values hang together, such as like freedom and democracy and I don't know, yeah, freedom, democracy, and equality, right? Or education and achievement and success, how those values hold together. But sometimes they are in conflict or they are contradictory. So for instance, if you have democracy, equality, but it also is alongside group superiority, how can you believe in equality and also believe in group superiority, right? And this is the great complexity, the great conundrum of life. So I want to try something in this virtual classroom that I have not done before. In the virtual classroom, I traditionally would put this on the board, and please excuse the poor formatting of my PowerPoint, but I couldn't make it work any better. But what I would do, or what I want to imagine, or I want to invite you to think about, is to consider a liberal or a loose definition, if you will, of subcultures. And go with me here and consider that subcultures, so one of the defining characteristics of subcultures is that they are groups of people who have similar ways of thinking and similar ways of being. And in this analysis, in this analogy, I'm thinking about conservatives and liberals as being these two separate subcultures, right? I mean, certainly they share similar philosophies. They may organize their life in certain ways, around certain hobbies, around certain leisure activities, around certain ways of certain things they drive, things they drive, color, even maybe things that they collect, sports they like, right? I mean, I'm thinking about liberals as being all vegan and recycling, and I'm thinking about conservatives as maybe being more about, hunting and big cars. The liberal drives their Prius, the conservative drives their four-wheel drive, right? Kind of thing. And I realize these are not perfect examples, but just as a thought exercise. And this, actually got this idea from a friend of mine many years ago. And then on one side of what you have here, you have values, you have ideas, you have beliefs, right? And then I want to imagine that you have these different subcultures. So how do these different subcultures think about these things differently? If we were together, we would go through this as a class, and I would put these issues on the board, and I would ask you, so what do conservatives think about this, and what do liberals think about this? And again, this is not intended to be exclusive of every single liberal or every single conservative or consistent across time. But what you see on the left here, on my left, is you have the values of, for instance, abortion and death penalty. Told you we would talk about the things that you don't normally talk about: abortion, death penalty, gun control, military spending, welfare spending. And I put food stamps because sometimes I'm talking about welfare for the poor, and educational spending. And then they're generally the position statements. So generally, right, conservatives call themselves pro-life, liberals call themselves pro-choice. Generally, death penalty. Liberals are okay. I mean, excuse me, not okay. Conservatives are okay with the death penalty. Liberals are less likely to be conservative. Generally, conservatives sort of support the position of less gun control, while liberals take more gun control. Generally, military conservatives are about more money for the military. Liberals are about at least not more money, or maybe more money to people and not more money to bombs. Welfare spending, generally conservatives are not favorable of expanding food stamps, of expanding benefits to the poor, and generally liberals are. Educational spending, generally conservatives don't want to dump more money into public education, and generally liberals do want to pump more money. But the point is I would invite you to look at this for just a second and notice if there's any contradictions. On either side of the political aisle, do you see issues that are inconsistent with each other? I should pause here, give you a second to look, right? Probably the most blaring inconsistency, the most glaring value contradiction are right here in these two. And then they're on both sides. And that's the thing, is they're on both sides, right? Up here you have one group calls themselves pro-choice. They're not okay with taking the life, or they are okay with terminating the life of an unborn, but they're not okay with taking the life of a convicted criminal. Same thing over here. These guys call themselves pro-life, but then they're okay with killing people who are on death row that may or may not be guilty, right? There's a contradiction here. You can move down here. These guys don't want any more control, or they want more control of guns, but at the same time, they don't want to control if a woman terminates a pregnancy. Same thing over here. You can find these guys want less control, but they want more control here. So it's the contradiction, right? One side, this side likes to spend money, this side not so much likes to spend money. This guy likes to spend money, so both on education but not on the military, right? And so then we also know from the other side that if you don't spend money, that a lot of people who don't get good education end up going into the military. So I'm just going to leave this here for you to ponder and consider where you are, and to give you to consider if all of your values, all of your personal values line up. I know that mine don't, but I am struggling. I'm working to at least reconcile them somehow and sort of get them in line. Okay, just gonna leave that there. Over here on this one, this is just more cultural terms. You have something called, we've already talked about cultural universals. The definition of a cultural universal is it's the idea that this thing exists in all known human groups. Anthropologists tell us there's really only a couple cultural universals. They are like music. All groups have music. What that music sounds like, how it's made is different, but all groups have music. Family form, human groups have some way of organizing, taking care of the children, but those vary from group to group. Even the ideas about the role of the father varies from group to group. There's one people group that a woman will have sex with lots of different men in order to conceive, so that his essence, like if she wants her child to be artistic, she'll have sex with an artistic fella. If she wants him to be smart, she'll have sex with a smart fella. And the idea is that all of these essences become her child. So cultural universals, music, family form, some sort of taboos are usually around sexual behavior. Ideal versus real culture. So when I speak about the Amish, I'm speaking about the ideal culture. I'm speaking about the textbook version of the Amish. I know that it ain't all good. I know that all you gotta do is watch any documentary on life in the Amish, and you can see real examples of real culture where our ideals, even American, we have this ideal of uh, of everyone participates in the democratic process, of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, there's opportunities for all. But I tell you what the research of the data looks like, what the patterns look like. The patterns look like that's not the reality of the way life really is for all people. So this idea is you got the textbook version of the culture, but then you also have the way it actually works. And then the last set of terms here refers to the relationship between our stuff and our non-stuff. So how our technology or what's referred to as what's called like cultural lag and cultural diffusion. But these terms are about how when we have new stuff and when our technology changes the way that we organize our life, and as we change the way we organize our life, right, this phenomena of cultural lag is the relationship between our stuff and our non-stuff. An example that is kind of outdated now is once people started having cell phones and everybody carried around in their pocket, we didn't have any rules. We hadn't yet figured out the etiquette about, cell phones. They used to ring in funerals and, we would still text and drive. Well, our non-stuff, the rules, the norms of behavior, how we work with that stuff, it had to catch up, and that's called lag, right? Is that eventually we have to figure out how we're going to use our technology. For instance, we know how to clone people, but we're figuring out the rules about cloning people. Cultural diffusion is a phenomena where you have some stuff in one culture and other stuff in another culture, and they sort of blend together to become something else. Food is a good example. Things like Tex-Mex, right? Is Tex-Mex Mexican or American, right? It's a blending of, it's a diffusion, if you will, of different kind of cultures. I'm trying to think of another example is if you're familiar with like Hello Kitty. Hello Kitty, I believe it's Japanese, but it seeps into our culture and we tweak it a little bit. We maybe change it. A lot of like anime, I think a lot of examples like that, but where we take something that belongs to, I'm trying to think of good European, but I'm not coming up with any good ones. And then finally, cultural leveling. Cultural leveling is a phenomenon where basically all cultures become alike, right? And cultural leveling is pretty clear, pretty salient if you like travel around the country very much, and you see it a lot in like American fast food and American retail. You can go into a Target in Texas and that store is laid out the same way that Target is going to be if it is in Missouri, right? The stores are laid out the same. Walmart's really good about this. Matter of fact, there's a term for it. It's called, no, it's McDonald's. It's called the McDonaldization of society. And it's the idea that everything like McDonald's in Virginia is going to be the same way as McDonald's in Nevada, right? Cultural things become alike. And some people like that, and some people not so much. All right, and then the last slide here is just sort of a summary, an emphasis on those two elements. That's a quiz question. The elements, you have an assignment that asks you to look at your cultural elements, your material cultural elements in your living space, and then to draw conclusions. Your material culture assignment, students are missing points on this one when they don't, they have to use the data, the stuff in the room to draw connections. Language, we got to have language to have culture. Subcultures or cultures within a culture. Sociologists use cultural relativism. That is a quiz question. Sanctions, both positive and negative, are used to like enforce the rules. And then technology, the stuff, almost always, actually it does, always changes before the non-stuff. Our things happen, things are developed, and then we got to figure out how we're going to use these things. And this, friends, wraps up chapter 2.